Dune Part 2 is a film I very much like. It's intense, immersive, soulful, sincere, made with what seems like passion and reverence for the material. But in spite of its many virtues, the film's not without its flaws, one of which I've noticed people commenting on is the love story between Paul and Chani. There are claims that this aspect of the film doesn't quite work, and I have to agree. There are different takes floating out there as to why exactly this love story doesn't quite hit right. These include claims that the performances of Chalamet and Zendaya, when sharing screen time, are lacking in energy, too stiff and cold to really feel like an authentic connection has been established between the couple. This may be true, but the degree to which it makes the romance feel ingenuine will vary from person to person. People enjoy different styles of performance after all. I can certainly understand how this aspect bothers people, and I think it does detract from the sense of genuine connection between the couple. But for me, it's not the main problem with the way their love story is presented. I think the issues start before we even get to what's on screen, with deviations from the source material for the Paul and Chani romance that not only detract from this love story, but destabilise the narrative of the whole film. Here's what I mean. I haven't read the first Dune book, or the others that follow, so correct me if I'm wrong here, but as far as I know, in the first book, Chani is just as on board with following Paul as the Fremen leader as the rest of his supporters are. She doesn't question the legitimacy of the prophecy about him, and is by his side as a loyal partner, soldier, and advocate. While I haven't read the book, I have watched the David Lynch Dune film, and that's how she's represented in that version, as a loyal partner. Although that film is rather a mess, and not as good as the new ones in most ways, the love story between Paul and Chani, I think, is in some ways better in the Lynch version. In other ways worse, and much less developed, with Chani not really being much of a character in her own right. But to a certain extent, the way this prior version of the character was slotted into the plot of the 1984 Dune film may have been better for the overall narrative, and I think from what I know it sounds like that would have been the case in the book. In the new Dune adaptation, Chani is sceptical of the prophecy about Paul, making that clear at multiple points with vehement antipathy towards this prophecy, proclaiming it to be a lie used to enslave her people. When discussing why Chani is portrayed this way in the new Dune adaptation, the film's director, Denis Villeneuve, explained that Dune author Frank Herbert was troubled by people taking the wrong message from Dune when it was originally published, viewing Paul as a hero. So, to try and avoid the same thing happening with the new adaptation, Villeneuve altered Chani's role in a way designed to signal to the audience that Paul is not a hero. Chani is a dissenting voice among the Fremen, denouncing the prophecy about Paul, reminding the audience the prophecy is manufactured as a mechanism of control, and she's shown to be a victim of Paul's betrayal. Additionally, there's a high-profile actress cast for the role, and to get performers like that on board, the offer of a meaty part is probably expected in most cases. That's not necessarily an ego thing from actors, it's just the kinds of roles actors take influence their profile and inform the kinds of roles they'll have available to them in the future. Actors are commodities, and their value fluctuates with every good or bad career choice made. So maybe there were multiple factors incentivizing the filmmakers to reinvent Chani as this more disagreeable figure. There was perhaps the allure of crafting a more nuanced dynamic between her and Paul by doing that, adding conflict and tension to their relationship to spice the story up even more so. The latter seems pretty good on paper, but the trouble is, in practice, I think it clashes with the overall narrative of Dune, detracts from the authenticity of the love story, and frankly makes the plot more complicated than necessary. It sends weird emotional signals to the audience, and I think means some of us don't really know how to place Paul and Chani as a couple in our minds. Something just feels off. They just don't feel convincing. Because the love story is being pulled around in different directions all the time, I can't settle into it as a viewer, particularly since there's so much else going on in the plot to concentrate on. One moment, the couple will be sharing some tender, intimate exchange, and the next, in conflict. When so much of the time these two characters spend together is taken up by all this toing and froing, it just doesn't leave enough time to show much proper romance between them. There's a scene where Chani and her friend Shishakli, I believe it is, are talking about Paul, and Chani says she trusts him. Then, if I remember correctly, literally in the next scene, Chani's alone with Paul, he calls her out for not trusting him, and she confirms his claim by telling him he's a foreigner. These moments are presumably meant to show internal conflict in Chani, but they just give really mixed messages about her. Paul tells Chani he doesn't want to go south because he's scared of triggering the holy war from his premonitions, and in spite of her skepticism towards him as a messiah, she's the one who convinces him to go. Maybe you could say she does that because she doesn't believe the prophecy about him, but when combined with everything else, and the way she subsequently acts when Paul reaches the south, it just comes across as a bit muddled. I suspect the original way Chani was represented in the book was better not only for her character, but for the narrative as a whole. The story is already complex, and adding another element of plot complexity into that mix is pushing things to buckling point. Within this complex story about warring houses, political machinations, religious prophecy, and sci-fi ecology, making the more tender, human parts of the story, like the romance, be simpler, I think is the right move. That's not just because it makes things easier to follow, but I think it strikes the right emotional notes. It's better if Chani is a trusting and loyal companion to Paul, who's completely in love with him, because that makes the way their romance turns out at the end, when Paul decides to marry the Emperor's daughter, hit much harder. We'd feel Chani's portrayal more the more loyal she was, and the more it seemed their romance was strong. Instead, as well as that moment hit in the new film, and it was good, it doesn't reach its full potential, because we've never been given the chance to fully buy into the romance at any point. The story never properly settles on Paul and Chani as a couple. It's consistently mired by different issues they have. So when Paul asks for another woman's hand in marriage, it's maybe more unclear than it should be what exactly to feel for Chani in that moment. Clearly she's hurt and betrayed, but it seems like, based on the nature of her relationship with Paul, this isn't as much of a blow as it otherwise would have been, or we're just left confused about how to feel about it. It would make more sense for Shishakli to be the one who's sceptical of Paul, while Chani's judgment is clouded by love for him. The love could act as an intoxicating force which makes her fully buy into Paul as a saviour figure, who she supports zealously, leading to future devastation. Throughout the story, Shishakli could have acted as the voice of doubt, a Jiminy Cricket-style figure who constantly questions Chani's infatuation with Paul, placed as not only an external representation of Chani's conscience, a voice trying to pull her away from disaster, but also as a point-of-view character for the audience, representing our understanding of the dangers of Chani's path, or informing us of them. There isn't all that much point to Shishakli even being in this film, other than just as basically a human prop to fill out the Fremen presence on screen, and give other characters someone to exchange exposition with. Other than that, she doesn't really contribute much to the story, and so utilising her in the way I've just laid out would have perhaps made better use of her. Not that there's anything wrong with having supporting cast to fill out the crowds on screen, make the world feel more populated and real, and give more central characters people to interact with. It would be silly to suggest there is. But when there's an opportunity to utilise such a character in a way that would actually benefit the story, it should probably be taken. Sometimes simplicity really is the best way to go for certain things, and the effort to add more complexity to Chani ultimately just makes things far messier than they should be. But that's one gripe about an otherwise excellent film. I just couldn't help but notice, especially since it's such an important aspect of the story. Anyway, what do you think? Do you agree with what I've said here, or did this portrayal of Chani work for you? Let me know in the comments below. Leave a like if you enjoyed, and subscribe for more. Thanks for watching, see you next time.